It's 5 hours GMT. This is the BBC World Service with me, Paul Henley, in London, and a news special on the attacks in Paris. France has declared a state of emergency and closed its borders after more than 120 people were killed in a series of shootings and bomb attacks in the capital, Paris. The sound of one of the bombs, which went off during the France v Germany football game, could easily be heard within the stadium and was picked up by TV cameras filming the match. The worst of the attacks was at the Bataclan concert venue, where around 100 people attending a rock concert were held hostage and then shot. President Hollande called the attacks an abomination and a barbaric act. We'll be bringing you the latest, and we'll have reaction from Paris and around the world live here on this programme. That's all coming up in the next hour. But first, the World Service News.
Hello, I'm Fiona MacDonald with the BBC News. At least 120 people have been killed in multiple shootings and bomb attacks in Paris. The worst bloodshed was at a rock concert where gunmen with automatic weapons took hostages and began shooting them. Jonathan Hill was outside the Bataclan concert hall when the attack began.
I heard 3 distinct firing shots that at first I didn't believe were actual shots from a gun. They almost sounded like fireworks cracking off in the middle of the street. And while that happened, I saw a guy, and he was in the middle of the street shouting "Allez, allez" at people. He almost seemed to be a good Samaritan, telling people to get out from the cafes and go inside. As that happened, I saw another shot, and I saw someone collapse to the floor outside the Bataclan.
3 of the attackers blew themselves up with suicide vests when police stormed the venue, and a 4th was shot dead. Freedom Jackson, who lives next to the venue, told the BBC what happened when the police moved in.
I was really scared because everyone started screaming and I could hear loads of people shouting, and it just sounded really aggressive outside, so I stayed in my room. And just after that we looked at the news and we saw that it was all happening next door. It quietened down for quite a while, and then there was loads of gunshots again, and loads of people screaming.
Earlier, the gunmen sprayed nearby restaurants with bullets, causing many casualties. Others set off bombs outside the National Stadium where France were playing Germany. In all, prosecutors say 8 assailants were killed, 7 of them suicide bombers. The French President François Hollande has declared a state of emergency in response to the attacks. 1,500 troops have been deployed to help police in Paris. Most public buildings will not open on Saturday. After visiting the concert hall, President Hollande said France would fight mercilessly against the terrorists responsible. Mr Hollande had been at the football match between France and Germany when the blasts went off. World leaders were quick to condemn the bloodshed. President Obama said the attacks were an outrageous attempt to terrorise civilians.
We don't yet know all the details of what has happened. We have been in contact with French officials to communicate our deepest condolences to the families of those who've been killed, to offer our prayers and thoughts to those who've been wounded. We have offered our full support to them.
President Xi Jinping of China offered his condolences and told President Hollande he was ready to step up cooperation against terrorism. Russia condemned what it described as inhuman murders. Several of the world's most famous buildings, including the World Trade Center in New York and Tower Bridge in London, were lit up with the colours of the French flag in a gesture of solidarity. World News from the BBC. The attacks in Paris come 10 months after Islamist gunmen attacked the offices of the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo, killing 12 people. They also came a day after the United States said it had targeted the Islamic State militant known as Jihadi John with a drone strike in Syria. Other news now. Russian athletes are facing a ban from international track and field events. Their athletics federation has been provisionally suspended after the country was accused of running a state-sponsored doping operation. The president of the International Athletics Federation, Sebastian Coe, called the affair a shameful event. Sarah Rainsford reports from Moscow.
This is a worrying result for Russia, which had been hoping and arguing hard for a lesser sanction. Looking downcast just after hearing of the suspension, the head of Russia's Athletics Federation accepted that doping is a problem here and vowed to continue work to stamp it out. Mikhail Butov said he was sorry that the steps taken so far hadn't been convincing enough. In the past few months, senior sports officials have been sacked, athletes disqualified and trainers fired. The sports minister has pledged to do whatever else it takes now to prove that Russia's truly committed to drug-free sport.
Experts at the International Monetary Fund have recommended that the Chinese currency, the yuan, join the currencies used in international commerce. The IMF chief, Christine Lagarde, backed their endorsement, which will go to a full board meeting in late November. Agreement would place the yuan on a par with the dollar, euro, pound and yen. A judge in the United States has fined the French energy and transport giant Alstom more than $770 million for bribing government officials in a number of countries. The company is accused of paying officials to win businesses. BBC News.
Hello, you're listening to the BBC World Service. You're joining us now for special coverage of the attacks in Paris. I'm Paul Henley. Let us bring you up to date on what we know has happened so far. The French president first has declared a state of emergency following a series of attacks on crowds of people out for the evening last night in Paris. 114 people have been confirmed dead so far in what's been described as the deadliest violence in France since the Second World War. At least 200 people are injured. Over the next hour, we'll get the latest from Paris and examine reaction worldwide to the events. But first, let's hear how things unfolded. It was Friday night, a mild evening, and many people were out and about enjoying a drink or dinner on terraces. First reports of gunfire came from Le Carillon bar in the popular 10th arrondissement, or district, at about 9:20 p.m. local time. Witnesses initially thought a firework had gone off until people realised that an unmasked man was opening fire with a semi-automatic gun. Then the gunman turned to Le Petit Cambodge in the same street. Witnesses say at least 10 people were killed there. A little later, shots were heard at a branch of McDonald's on the Canal Saint-Martin. Police said dozens of people were killed in attacks on restaurants and bars in the 10th arrondissement, which were crowded on the Friday night. Charlie Pitt is a BBC cameraman. He was 30 metres from a bar where people were shot.
It sounded like firecrackers to start off with, but then it lasted a long time. It obviously wasn't firecrackers. There was it probably went on for about a minute, and then there was a gap of about probably 10 seconds, and it started again. Everybody was sort of realised that it wasn't firecrackers and was sort of running everywhere. So when it calmed down, I walked back to it, and there were tables and chairs everywhere. We helped some injured women, but there were people obviously dead. I mean, there was shattered windows, and I mean, it was a complete mess. Blood everywhere.
Further north, the national football side was playing a friendly match against Germany at the national stadium, the Stade de France, when the first blast occurred. The sound of the bomb could easily be heard within the stadium and was picked up by television cameras filming the match. Well, the next reports of shootings came 10 minutes later to the south of the first restaurant attacks at La Belle Équipe bar in the Rue de Charonne in the 11th district. 2 gunmen sprayed bullets across an outside terrace. A Paris City Hall official said 4 gunmen systematically killed nearly 90 young people attending a concert by an American rock band at the Bataclan Music Hall in the 11th arrondissement, not far from the Bastille in the northeast of the capital. Jonathan Hill was outside the Bataclan when he witnessed the start of the attack there.
I heard 3 distinct firing shots that at first I didn't believe were actual shots from a gun. They almost sounded like fireworks cracking off in the middle of the street. And while that happened, I saw a guy. He was probably about 6'4", maybe 6'5", quite a heavy-set man. Looked Caucasian from about 50 yards away, and he was in the middle of the street shouting "Allez, allez" at people. He almost seemed to be a good Samaritan, telling people to get out from the cafes and go inside. As that happened, I saw another shot, and I saw someone collapse to the floor outside the Bataclan.
In total, there were 6 incidents. Police say 8 attackers have been killed, most of whom appear to have blown themselves up. The mayor of Paris has asked residents to stay indoors, and about 1,500 military personnel, extra personnel, are being deployed across the city at the moment. Catherine Guillardi is a French journalist and joins us now live from Paris. Catherine, what's the latest that you've heard? Bring us as up to date as you can first.
Well, I mean, you've said it all nearly. I mean, it has mainly happened between 9:30 o'clock French time till 2 in the morning after the assault at the Bataclan concert hall, and where dozens of people have been killed. And very quickly it was confirmed that we were over the 100 dead people, which was a big shock. From the beginning, we knew that the attacks had been at the same moment at least four different places. And now we're talking about 7 places, according to the police, and a total of 120 people. A lot of people are very seriously injured, so the toll will go up. At the moment, the Parisians are still asked to stay at home if they can, because if 8 assailants are indeed dead, either they committed suicide by exploding themselves, making themselves explode, or they were killed. But some of them are still on the loose, and we don't know where they are. As you said, it's a state of emergency, not only in the Parisian region, but for the first time in the whole of France, for the first time since a long time. And so it's difficult to get out of France. I'm hearing it's difficult to get inside France, but this has to be checked. People from, for example, French people who are in London who want to come back and who cannot at the moment. So this is the situation. It's a bit of a hangover this morning for everybody who is waking up now and not only discovering for some of them, but also waking up to see that it has actually really happened. The French newspapers have prepared their coverage, and we're talking about bloodshed, carnage, horror again. Same some newspaper. This time we are at war, says Le Figaro newspaper this morning. So it's a big shock, of course.
And how did your evening unfold, Catherine?
Well, I have to say that it was a Friday evening, and like many people, I was not following the news. And suddenly the news came as a shock, as something totally unexpected. Of course, it's just, I am still in that state where I think, no, this is not true. This is something else. It is a shock, of course, like if it would be, and like it has been for the people in Beirut, like it is regularly in other countries. We've had attacks last January. People are a bit more cautious this time of how we're going to react, how much we're together or not. It is a very bitter mood that we are in here. Bewilderment, very surprised, obviously, shocked, but also of the after. I think we're all afraid to think of the after, of what will happen. Will we still be together as French people? Will this divide our population more? It is very difficult.
No group has said that it carried out these attacks, and obviously it isn't clear yet the identity of the attackers. There's lots of speculation. It is clear that there was a certain degree of, expertise involved, isn't it?
Yeah, this August, actually, a young French man who had been to Syria for several months only was arrested here in Paris. And it was reported that he had planned to attack a concert hall and that he had been asked to do so by Daesh, the Islamic State. He had been instructed to do so. So it was apparently known by the French state that this was going to happen, or at least this was planned, that it came from Daesh, and that every week we are hearing today young men were arrested here in France or in Belgium, mostly, who were planning attacks on France. And what has happened is what was dreaded is that several attacks at the same time would be planned and have actually happened.
Catherine Gilliardi, journalist, live from Paris. Thank you very much indeed. With us now is Olivier Guittard, who is Managing Director of Global Strat, an international security and geopolitical risk consultancy firm. You're from Paris. Welcome to the studio, Olivier.
Thank you.
You're familiar with the Bataclan concert hall where the worst of the killings happened, aren't you?
Yes, very much so. As your previous guest mentioned, it's true that intel had come in about potentially attacking concert halls from the Islamic State. So the city was very well patrolled. You had, since January after the Charlie Hebdo attacks, 10,000 soldiers on the streets of Paris and other major cities protecting sensible sites. But at the same time, it's impossible for them in our societies, for the state to go and protect every single concert hall in Paris. But what our audience has to remember is that, unfortunately, this Mumbai-style attack was bound to happen in Western Europe. After the attack in 2008 and the impact it had on the Indian psyche, I was telling people about what could happen if it was done in the streets of London or Paris. This is something that doesn't require a lot of money. Preparation, yes. Coordination, yes. But it's something that can just happen because we have soft targets. And if you see what the targets were, they didn't focus on military personnel, which is usually the first that they go after. They didn't focus on law enforcement. They didn't focus on Jewish sites, which were protected. But they focused on people going out in a very fashionable area of Paris. And also what was the cherry on the cake for them was to go after the stadium, which is really the target that is totally different from the rest. And which makes sense is that they instill that fear factor because the president was attending the game, that nobody's safe. And those 3 suicide bombers that blew themselves up outside had this intent.
You talked about coordination. Obviously, there was some structure to these attacks. They all happened within about 40 minutes of each other. Can we rule out the possibility of the same people carrying them all out?
Yes. It's mostly from the reports and the people that I talked to in France. What we're looking at is the 8 attackers that were killed. 7 detonated themselves, and 1 was killed, but was also a suicide bomber. So this modus operandi makes us think that it has all the hallmarks of Islamic State, but it could be also Al-Qaeda. And what people have to remember when we talk about those 2 jihadist groups that are antinomic and that are fighting for the hearts and mind of jihadists is that in the case of the attacks in Paris in January, you had the first attack against Charlie Hebdo that was claimed for by AQAP, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, and the second and third attack against the Jewish supermarket was claimed for by Islamic State. And we know that those people were very friendly and were coordinating their attacks together. So,
Olivier, we're going to come back to you to talk about the wider picture, but just for now, you've been inside this music venue. It seats about 1,500 people. It's not huge. Can you just describe? We'll hear probably from eyewitnesses in due course. But this is a relatively small venue, and people were trapped inside it. This is where almost 100 people were confirmed dead.
Yes, very much so. I mean, that was for them a good target to pick because, as you said, it's very compact. It's also most of the time you don't have. It's just standing only. So it's much easier to control that kind of crowd by if you have, in this case, allegedly you had 4 people that could really control the area. That's exactly a little bit of the modus operandi you can imagine when there are not a lot of exits. So they couldn't have targeted a much larger venue with sitting and people going around their business.
It was a rock band playing. We've heard recently that none of the members of the band were hurt. Presumably they weren't on stage at the time. Do we know any detail?
No, unfortunately, I'm not privy to what happened with the rock band. But what I understand is that they came in 30 minutes after the beginning of the concert, and they shot the security guards. But one thing that we can think of is that probably it would make sense for them to target such a hallmark of Paris, because this is a very underground but still very mainstream place for major bands to play. So you have sometimes huge acts like U2 that would like to have a private concert. They would rent the Bataclan.
And we hear that in that particular attack, 2 of the gunmen apparently blew themselves up. 1 was shot by police. These are stories that evolve as we hear more detail, but we'll bring you up to date as soon as we know it. Let's hear now from someone who saw what was going on in one of the attacks. He didn't want to give his name when he spoke to my colleague Alice Baxter, but he watched much of the violence unfold from his flat in the 11th arrondissement.
Yeah, I went at the window and there was this guy with the Kalashnikov firing. It was at the corner, so he was firing in all the direction of all the street in this corner. So then a car came. He entered into the car and then went away with the car. And actually, there were 3 guys. There were 3 guys that were not killed by this killer and escaped. And so I didn't expect the situation was so terrifying. Then I checked better from the window. I saw a crowd of people going in the direction of body on the ground. And so I called the police, but many people were calling the police. And then I went down the street. It was probably not the best things to do, but I realized that there were in a bar many other bodies, more or less 4 or 5 bodies.
So you saw around 5 or 4 dead bodies on the street. That must have been incredibly harrowing.
This bar is like in the Parisian style, the table on the street. So the people who couldn't move. So they were between the wall and the table, and they were on the ground between the chair and the table. So then there was some cars with the driver. There was a car with the driver and the person, the passenger, also dead. And since this car was in the middle of the corner, it was blocking the situation. So also for the ambulance was difficult to arrive. Then the police arrived. They asked it to go home. At the beginning was difficult because there was a lot of people around. They make us understand that the terrorists were still everywhere. So then everybody went home, and I stayed at home practically without light, not to. And then I went on the back of the apartment. Not to stay at the window because it was unsafe.
Yeah, I mean, we know that the mayor of Paris has advised people and has done so for several hours now to stay inside, effectively creating a lockdown in central Paris. What you've been describing, it's just extraordinary. This is central downtown Paris. It's vibrant. It's Friday night. It's an area that really epitomises the cafe culture of Paris. So the sights that you've seen, you must still really be digesting them all. I also understand that police snipers took up positions in your apartment and you then had to hide in the bathroom.
Yeah, actually, a few minutes after, they knocked at the door and they asked me if they could use the apartment because my apartment has it was on the scene, so they they enter in the apartment, and I haven't seen what happened after, because actually they didn't ask me to stay in the bathroom, but it was probably the safest place in the apartment, and I stayed there, also not to deconcentrate the guy, and so I don't know what happened. He stayed at the window probably. He was fully armed, and probably 1 hour ago, 2 other guys came helping him, and 20 minutes ago everything finished. So they said thank you and they went away.
And how do you feel now? Do you feel safe? Do you feel scared? How do you feel?
It's a difficult question, because now probably the situation is under control, probably. But last time when happened in the Charlie Hebdo, the following day was not safe at all. And I was probably lucky that in that moment I was at home having dinner, because if by chance I was going to a supermarket to buy something, I could be in the middle of everything. So it can happen.
That was an eyewitness from the Parisian 11th arrondissement who saw things unfolding from his flat. He didn't want to give his name. He was speaking to Alice Baxter there. Still with us in the studio on the BBC World Service is Olivier Guittard, Managing Director of Global Strat, which is an international security consultancy firm. Olivier, he's talking about last time, the Charlie Hebdo attacks, only 11 months ago. It's too early, though, isn't it, to assume that these were Islamic militants who carried out the attacks? Remember, that conclusion was jumped to straight after the shootings in Norway of a few years ago and was wrong.
Right. Except we have a slew of points and coincidences that are telling. Remember that it's not by coincidence that France has been time and time again singled out by jihadist groups such as the Islamic State as being the number one enemy, sometimes even ahead of the US. So you have to remember that jihadists view France's policy on counterterrorism when it comes, for instance, to Africa as being very problematic. Also, you have the coincidence that just a few weeks back, France, contrary to the UK, started attacking Islamic State targets inside Syria. And interestingly enough, the first two airstrikes happened against Islamic State training camps where the French authority told us that French foreign fighters were in there preparing attacks against the homeland.
And there are unconfirmed reports from eyewitnesses who were at some of these attacks saying that gunmen said, "This is for Syria." That's a phrase that's been quoted.
Right. I saw those reports. It is true that in terms of targets, which are basically targeting our way of life, this is totally different from anything else. The fact also there was a suicide vest is something of a major change in modus operandi for terrorists in Western Europe. This is a brand new phenomenon for us to look at.
Olivier Guittard, for the moment, thank you. We'll be bringing you more about the Paris attacks. Olivier will stay in the studio. You're listening to the BBC World Service, and for those who've just joined us, we're bringing you special coverage of the attacks that have occurred in Paris on a busy Friday evening. This is the BBC World Service. We're live from London. My name's Paul Henley.
With bbc.com/news, you get the latest news stories anytime you like. bbc.com/news offers you the most comprehensive news coverage in the world, and its stories are easy to search and navigate. Whether you're interested in science, health, technology or business, the bbc.com/news website can offer it all. It also gives you the opportunity to listen live to our news output or check the latest breaking news with our minute-by-minute news feed. If you want to take the news with you, we offer you downloadable podcasts to listen at your convenience, or archive programming so you can catch up on the programmes you've missed. Or you can access bbc.com/news on your mobile phone. bbc.com/news also lets you give feedback direct to our programme teams. All this content, coverage and opportunity makes the BBC the world leader in news coverage online.
This is the BBC World Service. You're listening to special coverage of the Paris attacks. I'm Paul Henley in London. In the next 30 minutes, we'll go back to the French capital. How's it coping after the worst attack there since the Second World War? We'll get reaction from around the world and expert analysis from my guest here in the studio, Olivier Guitta. What was the intelligence ahead of the attacks? How can France protect itself? We'll be asking those and many other questions coming up. First, a summary of the news.
BBC News with Fiona MacDonald. At least 120 people have been killed in multiple shootings and bomb attacks in Paris. The worst bloodshed was at a rock concert where gunmen with automatic weapons took hostages and began shooting them. 3 of the attackers blew themselves up with suicide vests when police stormed the Bataclan venue, and a 4th was shot dead. Earlier, the gunmen sprayed nearby restaurants with bullets, causing many casualties. Others set off bombs outside the National Stadium where France were playing Germany. In all, prosecutors say 8 assailants were killed. The French President François Hollande has declared a state of emergency in response to the attacks. 1,500 troops have been deployed to help police in Paris. Most public buildings will not open on Saturday. After visiting the concert hall where the worst killings took place, President Hollande said France would fight mercilessly against the terrorists responsible. World leaders were quick to condemn the violence in Paris. President Obama said the attacks were an outrageous attempt to terrorise civilians. President Xi Jinping of China offered his condolences and told President Hollande he was ready to step up cooperation against terrorism. Russia condemned what it described as inhuman murders. In other news, experts at the International Monetary Fund have recommended that the Chinese currency, the yuan, join the elite currencies used in international commerce. The IMF chief, Christine Lagarde, backed their endorsement, which will go to a full executive board meeting in late November. And Russian athletes are facing a ban from international track and field events. Their athletics federation has been provisionally suspended after the country was accused of running a state-sponsored doping operation. The president of the International Athletics Federation called the affair shameful. BBC News.
Hello, you're listening to the BBC World Service. I'm Paul Henley, and you're joining us now for special coverage of the Paris attacks. At least 120 people have been killed in a series of coordinated bombings and shootings, 80 of them at a rock concert. Others died in a reported suicide blast near the Stade de France, where France were playing Germany. The French President, François Hollande, was there at the time. Scores more are injured. A state of emergency has been declared throughout France. A spokeswoman for the prosecutor's office said more attackers could still be at large. In the early hours of this morning, President Hollande visited the scene of the Bataclan concert hall and promised that France would, he said, be ruthless in the fight against terrorists.
We wanted to be here, among all those who saw these atrocious things, to say that we are going to fight, and our fight will be merciless, because these terrorists that are capable of such atrocities need to know that they will be confronted by a France that is determined, unified and pulled together, and a France that will not let itself be overawed, even if today it is expressing an infinite amount of emotion at this drama and this tragedy, which was an abomination and a barbaric act.
President Obama has condemned the attacks and offered US support to France.
This is an attack not just on Paris, it's an attack not just on the people of France, but this is an attack on all of humanity and the universal values that we share. We stand prepared and ready to provide whatever assistance that the government and the people of France need to respond.
The newly elected Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau promised that his country would offer all possible assistance.
Obviously, our hearts and thoughts and prayers go out to our French cousins through this dark and terrible time. These terrorist attacks are deeply worrying and obviously unsettling to people around the world. We have offered all of our help and support to the government of France, to the people of France at this time.
President Xi Jinping of China has offered his condolences and told President Hollande he was ready to step up cooperation against terrorism, and Russia condemned what it described as inhuman murders. Several of the world's most famous buildings, including the World Trade Center in New York and Tower Bridge in London, were lit up with the colours of the French flag in a gesture of solidarity. You're listening to the BBC World Service with special coverage of the attacks in Paris, bringing you up to date with what happened and bringing you also reaction from around the world. I'm Paul Henley in London. Back now to the detail of those shootings and bombings in Paris, which have left more than 100 people dead. A bar in the Rue de Charonne in Paris's 11th district called La Belle Équipe was also attacked on Friday night. Haxi Myers-Belkin is a journalist for France 24, France 24, and was one of the first journalists to reach the scene of that attack. She spoke to me earlier from Paris.
We saw lots of people in a state of panic and confusion calling loved ones, the police themselves not quite knowing what had gone on, really. But it was a Friday night, very busy, lots of people on the street, lots of people out drinking. It's a very buzzy area. It's the 10th arrondissement of Paris, right near Bastille in the east of Paris. And people were out enjoying themselves. And that's when the gunmen, because we believe there was more than one gunman, and that's when they opened fire.
And it was obvious that there'd been victims of this, was it?
Yes, there were already ambulances on the scene, and as we were there, more and more ambulances turned up.
Did you see bodies? Did you see injured people?
We were about 150 metres away when we were at our closest to the restaurant that's called La Belle Équipe at number 90 Rue de Charonne, and we did see bodies on stretchers being lifted up into ambulances. I don't know if they were dead or injured, but I can only assume that there were some dead among them because the figure we're getting is 18 or 19 people dead at that restaurant.
Was there still an edginess that more attacks might take place at that stage?
Absolutely. I mean, during the 4 hours that we were on Rue de Charonne, we were moved around 4 or 5 times. When the police cordon had been set up, any time a vehicle tried to enter that part of the street, the part that had been cordoned off, the increasingly hefty army and police presence was very nervy. Any car that approached was quickly turned away, and if they didn't turn away quickly, the army started shouting, and it seemed that they were very much ready to use their rifles if necessary.
And those people that you talked to that were there when the attack happened, what did they say?
I spoke to a couple who were on holiday who were 3 doors down from the restaurant where the attack happened. They said they had in fact tried to get into the restaurant earlier in the evening. They say that they heard gunshots, a shower of gunshots over 2 to 3 minutes, and that they went outside into the street to see what was happening, and they saw bloodied bodies on the street outside the restaurant. They then went back inside and hid under the tables for cover. Later on, they went back out into the street, and one man told me he saw cartridges on the road, which to him suggested that the shooters had operated from within a car on the street.
You described this as a buzzy area. It's a young person's nightlife area in Paris, is it?
Absolutely, yes. But the place on Rue de Charonne that was targeted was very much a bar cafe, so people were eating. There was a terrace outside, so the people I spoke to felt that could have been one of the reasons that bar and maybe not the bars around it were targeted.
Obviously, a mild night for November, a lot of people around.
Well, exactly. It has been unusually mild. It has been getting a little chillier today and yesterday, but around 8 p.m, 9 p.m, definitely warm enough to sit outside in a heated terrace, as indeed many people were. The restaurant was full, by all accounts, when the attack happened. In
what way do you think this has changed the game, that people out for a night out were targeted? Not journalists, not specific groups?
It's very scary. People are shocked. People will be in shock for weeks and months to come. But as we saw with Charlie Hebdo, there is a tenacious spirit in Paris, in France. People are determined not to let the terrorists win. Of course, this attack, from the information we're getting, is a game changer, but it's far too early to tell. France will be in a state of mourning for days and weeks to come. And I think it's only after that we'll really be able to get a sense of the impact of these attacks.
That was Haxi Myers-Belkin, a British journalist living in France and working for the French national TV station France 24. Freedom Jackson is 18 years old, been living in Paris for just 2 months. She's been watching events unfold tonight in the city from her apartment just a couple of doors away from the Bataclan music venue where the worst of the attacks took place. My colleague Dotun Adebayo spoke to her a bit earlier and asked her when she realised what had happened.
Just before anything really happened, I was making dinner in my kitchen. And I heard a girl screaming, and it sounded like there was a fight, but I thought, well, it's a Friday night and I'm in Paris, so it's probably just like a fight between some people. It's nothing serious. But it wasn't. It was quite aggressive, so I closed the window because I didn't want to hear it, and I could hear the police coming. And then I went into my bedroom to just go to bed, and I heard the girl screaming I could still hear this girl screaming. And she was screaming for help, and then she screamed some a male's name, Talib, and then there was a massive bang, and I thought that it was just a firework or something not serious, but then it carried on. The people started screaming, and there were more noises like gunshots, and I was really scared, so I went to bed. I called my friend to speak to them because I didn't know what to do. I live alone and I'm 18 in my first 2 months in Paris by myself. So I rang them just because I felt unsafe. And then they heard a round of gunshots and they said, no, that's definitely a gunshot. You need to stay in your room and don't leave. And then just after that, we found out that everything that had been happening, and it was all next door to me.
Have you been to the Bataclan before yourself?
No, I haven't been to the Bataclan, but I walk past it every day because it's next to me. But I haven't actually ever been in.
What's the mood like, or the situation like now outside your window? Have you been brave enough to look out?
Yeah, well, in the end, I decided to go into my neighbour's apartment because I was scared by myself. At the moment, there's all the police around the outside, and there's a police...
Sure, I wonder if you could say that again. We lost you. I was asking, have you been bold enough, if you like, to look out of your window? What's the situation like there now?
Well, I decided to move to go and stay in my neighbour's apartment because I was too scared to stay by myself with the gunshots. But when you look out the window, you can just see all the police, and they have all of their shields and their bulletproof outfits. There's 2 massive police vans, and they were circling the building before. And at the moment, they're just standing around.
We understand that the police, or the authorities at least, have stormed the building. Did you see or hear any of that?
I think I heard it because there were loads and loads of gunshots, and you could hear people screaming.
But you don't know whether it's over or it's still ongoing?
Well, I heard that the 2 terrorists had been killed, and that people were meant to be leaving the building, but I haven't actually seen anyone leave the building yet. But I also haven't been looking out of the window for the whole time. But I definitely heard it quiet. It was quiet for quite a while, and then suddenly there were loads and loads of gunshots and people screaming. So I'm assuming that's when they raided it. What
an experience, Freedom, after only 2 months in Paris.
I can say I definitely wasn't expecting it.
No, have you contacted your folks? Have you told them you're okay?
Yeah, no, I've contacted my family. They're all up and awake and not going to sleep.
Right, but you've told them that you're okay anyway.
Yeah, no, they know that I'm fine. They're just watching the news to see
how does all of this change your experience of being in France?
I mean, I can't say that I love Paris still. The terrorist attack can't put you off a country because it's not something it doesn't represent a country, but obviously it's terrifying, and it's made me feel like I have to be more aware that things like this do actually happen, because usually you hear about it on the news and you think, oh, okay, that happened somewhere, but when it's actually outside your house, you never expect that.
Freedom Jackson, 18 years old, in the first 2 months of living in Paris. With us still, Olivier Guitta, head of Global Strat, which is a geopolitical risk consultancy firm. People's minds, of course, in the wake of attacks like these go back to Charlie Hebdo attacks it was only 11 months ago. After that, security was stepped up significantly in Paris, wasn't it?
Yes, very much so. I mean, they were placed on the highest terror alert level. Soldiers have been moving in, and a lot of sites were protected. Also, you have to remember that in the past year, France has been foiling plots almost on a weekly basis of terrorism. They've been arresting a lot of potential terrorists, and also you've had still issues of returning jihadists from Syria and Iraq. France is number one in Europe in sheer numbers of Western recruits to Islamic State and al-Nusra.
It makes up nearly a quarter of European recruits, is that right?
Yeah.
Although the numbers are fairly low, a quarter of about 5,000, something like that.
I would say that it's for the French, it's close than 2,000. The British numbers are at 700 officially, but I think they're way understated, and I suspect that the number of Brits having gone to Syria, Iraq is much closer to the French number. So, but we've seen just with 8 people the damage that can be done if they're properly trained, and that's really what security services in France had as a nightmarish scenario. What is interesting is I wrote a piece about a week ago warning about rising terror wave in Western Europe, and I quoted a French advisor to the Ministry of Interior that said, look, we're overstretched, we've done whatever we could do, but something bad is going to happen. We cannot focus on every single lead that we have, and that's what people have to realize is there's going to be blame on the security services, on the intel, but they don't have enough means, and as I said in previous instances, they were good at discovering who was potentially a terrorist, but it takes a lot of manpower to follow and track and monitor potential jihadists.
There was a specific threat against a music venue in Paris recently, was there, or was it just a rumour?
No, what happened is in August, a returning jihadist from Syria was arrested, and in September it came to light that he had been instructed specifically by the Islamic State to focus on concert halls. So there was not any additional intel from this, but as we know, unfortunately, Islamic State is very good at doing what it's saying it's going to do. So it was a very credible threat at the moment that one of their operatives had this as a specific target.
Back in January, the French public reaction was one of overwhelming solidarity, the Je suis Charlie campaign and so on, people standing united against terrorism. Obviously, it's too early to say that there's a return to that spirit. Do you think it's likely now?
Look, it's even worse, as we said at the beginning of the program, than ever before, because in a way people thought that the first targets of the terrorists in January were what we would say usual or classical targets. Now they're seeing that everyone walking in the streets of Paris is potentially a target. So it will be much more of a reaction that will be much more of not only outrage, but thinking about what to do next to protect yourself and your family.
Well, it's called fear, isn't it? I mean,
right.
That is the aim of a terrorist attack.
Yes, and that's really what it's all about when you see the modus operandi of this attack, is to make everybody crawl under and stop living our way of life in a democracy like we should.
Now, people have been told to stay indoors in Paris for the moment, and by and large we hear they're following those instructions, but that can't last, can it? You can't have a whole city in shutdown.
No, I think that has to do with the fact that there's still different views about other terrorists on the loose, and I think as soon as they know that they've killed, or at least the 8 perpetrators that we know of, then this would be loosened up. But you have to remember, Charlie Hebdo and the attack on the kosher supermarket and the killing of the policewoman happened in the course of 3 days. So they have to be very careful that there's not going to be more attacks in the following days.
Do you think it's possible that these could be the 8 people, that could be it, who carried out the attack? Could it be done without accomplices?
It depends of 2 things. It depends if it's homegrown terrorism, if it's people that were actually prepared sleeper cells kind of covert attacks, and that would know specifically where to target and preparation for months for such an attack, or if it is just people that are returning from Syria, or also people coming from abroad, because as we've seen in the past 2 weeks, Islamic State had called in for Europeans from different countries to come and attack other neighboring countries because of the security services focusing specifically on nationals. So they were looking at, for instance, an Italian coming to France to attack because he wouldn't be on the radar of French security services.
For the moment, Olivier Guittard, thank you. We'll come back to you. We've talked about reaction from President Obama already, from the Canadian Prime Minister, the Chinese leader. Some news that the Iranian President Hassan Rouhani strongly condemned these attacks in Paris, branding them crimes against humanity. It was a message that he sent to his French counterpart, François Hollande, and saying he sent his condolences to the grieving French people and to the government. Of course, an attack on this scale has repercussions for governments across the world who'll be checking their own internal security. Let's go to the United States now. Edwin M. Smith is a professor of international relations at the University of Southern California. He joins us live from Los Angeles. Thank you, Edwin, for coming on. What's the impact of this in the States?
Well, it's certainly the case that our hearts go out to the people of Paris. This is not an expectation for something like this to happen in the City of Lights, but there has always been concern about the possibility, particularly in the United States, the idea of foreign fighters with ISIS. The nightmare is that this is ISIS, and we're talking about foreign fighters from ISIS who come back with European passports and are able to get into their home countries and wreak this kind of havoc.
That, as you say, is the nightmare scenario, and one which has been quite widely predicted by security services all over the Western world.
Yes, it has, and for many years. I remember discussions long ago about the possibility of terrorists with American passports coming back and wreaking havoc.
We've heard that security in major American cities has been stepped up already in response to this. That's fairly predictable. What other action do you think the security services in the US will be taking?
Well, certainly there will be attention paid as to the extent there are many fewer foreign fighters who've gone to ISIS from the United States, but there are some. There will be attention paid with the surveillance that we have to those people and their contacts. Certainly each of the major cities, most notably in New York, have very sophisticated local police intelligence services that keep track of all sorts of activities. So there have been discussions of heightened alerts in the United States for a few days, so that I think that that activity is going to continue, and that activity will heighten. It may not be as visible as it might be in other places, but certainly there's going to be intense consideration of the risks.
Do stay on the line, Mr. Smith. Olivier Guittard, briefly, intelligence sharing, how would it work? Will French security services share everything they have with the US as a matter of course? Their oldest ally, as President Obama has called France?
Look, the intelligence sharing has been going very well. Even in the dark days of the relationship under the Bush administration, the French and the US have done tremendous work on counterterrorism. The question now is mostly to get the original intel to be able to share it. So as much as possible, you would need people from the inside to help you, or family members to come forward and say, look, I think that my son or my husband is onto something no good. So they would need to work on this a lot. But look, in the past 15 months, close to 7,000 people just in France have come forward with intelligence on potential jihadists.
Edwin Smith in Los Angeles, we've seen a series of big organised attacks in European cities, in Madrid, in London, in Paris, twice this year. There are fears, presumably, of something similar on US soil, are there?
Yes, consistently. That's been a continuing fear since 9/11. Many people have said it's just a matter of time until the next one happens. I think what has surprised a lot of people is that there's not been an attack of a major scale in the United States since 9/11. Some people presume that that's a reflection of success. It may just be a reflection of luck.
It is the case, isn't it, that fewer US citizens have joined IS than British or French ones?
Absolutely, that's absolutely the case, and we are, from our perspective, we are relieved. We have a nightmarish scenario, so we build in our minds about U.S. citizens coming back as foreign fighters.
Politicians have been quick in the United States to pick up on what's happened and not just expressing condolences. Are you in the picture on that?
I get quite impatient with the comments of American politicians in primary campaigns who say things that make absolutely no sense. I think there's
things about the immigration debate and conclusions that could be drawn.
I could make a long list of things that make me quite crazy, but I think they will feel it is necessary to attend to their constituents by saying how tough we are and how strong we are and how we must avoid any of these kinds of events. That's not a helpful way of approaching the situation, but there must be seriousness.
Has President Obama done the right thing, expressing condolences within apparently minutes? He said he hadn't spoken to President Hollande yet because he imagined he'd be quite busy.
Yes, I think President Obama has reacted in exactly the right way, acknowledging our concerned condolences to the French people and extending whatever assistance the French may seek.
Edwin M. Smith, Professor of International Relations at the University of Southern California. Thank you very much. Olivier Guittard, just a quick word before the news. Is this seen as a Parisian problem in France? Do people outside Paris, I know there have been attacks in Bordeaux, for instance, have similar fears?
Look, yes, there was the attack also in Lyon. That was the same day of the attack in Sousse and in Kuwait. So yes. Most probably what would have been even much more of a fear factor would have been to hit provincial towns rather than Paris, because then you instill the fear that in no places you are safe. So people expect attacks in major cities, but not in provincial towns. And that's a little bit, I think, the next step and the next modus operandi that probably jihadists are going to look at.
This certainly seems like an extremely high-impact series of attacks. In that case, they've absolutely hit the jackpot, these attackers, haven't they? That was the aim.
Yes, and we will have to see exactly how much of an impact on the economy it will have if people will start stopping to go to restaurants, go to cinemas, spend money. And look, in the case of Tunisia, we've seen that by crippling the tourism, you can cripple an economy. So hopefully this won't happen in France.
It would take some solidarity to keep behaviour absolutely normal in Paris right now, though, wouldn't it?
Yes, very much so. You cannot expect people to just go about their business tomorrow and go clubbing without thinking of what happened last night.
Olivier Guittard is with us, Managing Director of Global Strat, a risk consultancy firm. You're listening to the BBC World Service, bringing you the latest on the attacks in Paris. My name's Paul Henley. This is the World Service.
With bbc.com/news, you get the latest news stories anytime you like. Whether you're interested in science, health, technology or business, the bbc.com/news website can offer it all. It also gives you the opportunity to listen live to our news output or check the latest breaking news with our minute-by-minute news feed. All this content, coverage and opportunity makes the BBC the world leader in news coverage online. bbc.com/news.
BBC World Service, the world's radio station.